Okay, get back at reading the Why UFOs Operation Trojan Horse by John A. Keel. There is no plot to cover up the truth, but a sensible decision made by men whose minds have been boggled by just a glimpse of the overwhelming reality they encountered in their search for evidence to prove or disprove the existence of UFOs. And I'm reading this off archive.org. Machines from beyond time. Quote, it was shaped like a disc about the size of a boxcar, with a dome top and square red and green windows. Mrs. Rita Malley recalled, quote, it made a humming sound, something like the vibrations of a television antenna in the wind, end quote. Mrs. Malley, a pretty young blonde mother of two, was recounting her science fiction-like experience of Tuesday, December 12, 1967. She was driving home along Route 34 in Ithaca, New York, with her 5-year-old son, Dana, in the back seat. Around 7 p.m., she became aware of a red light that seemed to be following her. Quote, it was speeding slightly, she explained later. Quote, so naturally I assumed I was just about to be pulled over by the state police, end quote. She glanced out the window and discovered that instead of a police car, she was being paced by an eerie illuminated flying object that was traveling along just above the power lines to the left of the car. At this same moment, she said, she was horrified to find that she could no longer control the automobile. She shouted anxiously to her young son to brace himself, but he remained motionless. Quote, it was as if he were in some kind of trance, end quote. And she continued, quote, the car pulled over to the shoulder of the road by itself and ran over an embankment into an alfalfa field and stopped. Okay. And, quote, while a white twirling beam of light flashed down from the object, I heard the humming sound. Then I began to hear voices. They didn't sound like male or female voices, but were weird. The words broken and jerky, like the way a translator sounds when he is repeating a speech at the United Nations. But it was like a weird chorus of several voices. Quote, I became hysterical, she admitted, frankly. Quote, my son would not respond to my cries. I knew the radio wasn't on. The voices named someone I knew and said that it was and said that at that moment my friend was involved in a terrible accident miles away. They said my son would not remember any of this. Then the car began to move again, although still not under my control. I came up out of the field and over a ditch as if it were nothing, and then back onto the road, end quote. She said she got control of the car again and jammed her foot down on the accelerator, speeding all the way home. Quote, I knew something was wrong the moment she walked into the house, end quote. Her husband, John Malley, told reporters, quote, I thought maybe she had had an accident with the car or something, end quote. The next day, Mrs. Malley learned that her friend had been in a serious automobile accident the night before. She told her incredible story to local civilian UFO investigators and later to Syracuse New York Herald Journal in December 21, 1967, published a brief outline without revealing her name. For years now, apparently, sincere people have been relating unbelievable experiences similar to Mrs. Malley's. Some of the UFO factions have battled to ridicule and suppress such contactees' tales, fearing that they serve to discredit the situation, but they keep coming in year after year from every corner of the globe. Reporters and investigators who interviewed Mrs. Malley came away convinced that she was telling the truth as she knew it. Quote, days later, when memories of the episode would flood her mind, end quote, the Syracuse Herald American noted, quote, she would break down sobbing all over again, end quote. Her story does contain several important details which have cropped up in many other little-known UFO encounters. A large percentage of these events seem to occur when a small child is present. In this case, the child went into a kind of trance. Such trances are frequently reported. The car itself was taken out of Mrs. Malley's hands. This seizure of control of the mechanical objects, even of airplanes in mid-flight, is also a common factor. Mrs. Malley's extreme emotional reaction to the event, even days afterward, is still another key point. Finally, if her story is true, she was given absolute proof to her that the UFO is not only knew her identity, but knew of her relationship of a distant friend, and even knew that the other party was involved in an accident. All this is pretty big pill to swallow for those who have not followed events like this carefully over a long period of time. In many cases, the UFO nuts have convincingly demonstrated that they have total knowledge of the individual participants, and they can even foretell their future. There is a superabundance of historical documentation which plainly indicates that these objects and their elusive occupants have always been a part of the environment of Earth, and that they seem to know everything about us and are able to speak our languages and are even familiar with the total lives of some, if not all, human beings. So long as we adhere to the notion that we are dealing with random extraterrestrial visitors, none of these contactee stories make any sense. So I ask you to place the UFOs in a terrestrial or ultra-terrestrial framework. Think of them as you might think of a next-door neighbor who is hooked up to your party line. The pieces of this puzzle will begin to fall into place. of prophets and prophecy. Many theologians reject any suggestion that unidentified flying objects may be even remotely connected with religion. But many leading ufologists suspect that innumerable historical incidents branded as religious phenomena may actually be misunderstood UFO activity. The Bible was completely suppressed for centuries during the Dark Ages, and then it was heavily edited and censored, whole sections being deleted altogether before the modern version was released. Scores of translators contributed to the muddle by altering meanings with high-flown poetry, by subtly interjecting their own comments and opinions. As a result, the contents of modern translation vary widely, and many of the original meanings and descriptions of what were probably actual events have been mutilated beyond interpretation. Theologians recognize this and freely comment upon it. The late Pope John the 23rd once made a wry remark about the confusion brought about by all these translations. Try to shelve your own religious beliefs for a moment and look at the Bible stories objectively. The prophet Elijah was well protected by balls of fire which came out of the heavens and consumed 100 soldiers and their companions. Kings chapter 1. I guess Kings 2. In chapter 2 of the second book of Kings, Elijah leads Elias. I've read this book numerous times. Elijah leads Eliza into the desert where a fish-shaped object spitting fire from it, its tail descends from the sky to carry him away forever. I don't remember that. Most translations of the Bible have somehow managed to turn this object into chariots or chariot of fire drawn by fiery horses. Read this section carefully, and the implications are startlingly clear. With Elijah somehow connected with the aerial race who protected him and who finally took him away. Fireballs and thunderbolts from the angry skies apparently wreaked a lot of havoc in the biblical times. Some scholarly scientists have suggested that these accounts sound suspiciously like atomic explosions. A Soviet physicist, Professor M. Agris, has even proposed that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by an atomic bomb. Lot's wife, he asserts, did not turn to a pillar of salt, but was reduced into a pile of ashes when she ignored a warning not to linger behind Lot's fiery party. Well, actually, it's warned not to look behind, not linger behind. Furthermore, in an article in Moscow's Literaturная Gazette in 1959, Professor Agris offered a startling theory that ancient Baalbek was the Cape Kennedy of its day. I don't know about that one. Serving as a launching platform for spaceships from another civilization. His proof consists of the tektites and fused crystals found there. Such substances are the byproducts of atomic explosions. A flying roll measuring 15 feet and 8 by 8 feet is described in the Bible of Zechariah, chapter 5. I don't know about that one either. The children of Israel were said to have been led out of Egypt by a pillar of fire in the sky. Exodus chapter 13. According to the detailed Bible story, Moses not only held conversations with a brightly burning bush, and the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. End quote. Exodus 3:2. But he was called to submit to the summit of Mount Sinai after a cloud appeared and covered it. Some people believe Mount Sinai is actually the pyramid there in Egypt and Giza. Just to let you know. So anyways, the summit of Mount Sinai after a cloud appeared and covered it. Moses climbed the mount and disappeared into, quote, the midst of the cloud, end quote. He was gone for 40 days and 40 nights, while the people waited below. Exodus chapter 24. Mount Sinai is actually just a high and rugged hill, and we might ask how Moses managed to survive alone on its summit for more than a month without food. Or it's not even a real story, so, which is probably the case. It's just make-believe like everything else in the Bible. Perhaps there was more to the, quote, clouds, end quote, than the children of Israel suspected. When Moses finally returned, he brought with him orders for the construction of an ark to be filled with gold artifacts and left a token to the Lord. Among the instructions were directions for building a, quote, mercy seat, end quote, of pure gold measuring 50 inches long and 30 inches wide. Gold plays an important part in many Bible stories, and it also seems to have an interesting role in UFO mysteries. And I think there is something there. I think the Bible is actually black magic myself. So, from my reading, research is dark stuff, man. That the pillar of fire not only led to the Israelites out of Egypt, it also intervened and protected them from the pursuing Egyptian army, Exodus chapter 4. But the most graphic account of all is detailed in the first chapter of Ezekiel, and is so well known and so frequently quoted, we need only to mention here that Ezekiel claimed an encounter with 4 strange beings who got out of some kind of flying object. Their appearance, he said, was like burning coals of fire, like the appearance of lamps. In a paper presented before the American Rocket Society on November 15, 1962, Dr. Carl Sagan, a young Harvard astronomer, repeated some of Professor Agris' speculations and urged that ancient myths and legends be re-examined for possible clues to an early visit by extraterrestrial civilization. The biblical story of Enoch, for example, relates how he dreamed of, quote, 2 men, and very tall, such as I have never seen on earth, and their faces shone like the sun, and their eyes were like burning lamps. They stood at the head of my bed and called me by my name. I awoke from my sleep and saw clearly these men standing in front of me, end of quote. These tall men took him into the sky and conducted him on a tour of 7 heavens. When he returned to Earth, he wrote 360 books about what he had seen and learned. Although the book of the Secrets of Enoch has been widely published, the Bible grants him only a few lines in chapter 5 of Genesis. The book of Secrets of Enoch. I have never heard of that in all my days. The book of the Secrets of Enoch. I just popped right up. I know, Book of Enoch, and there's Book of the Secret. Okay. Okay. Now I gotta find my place again. Alright. The Book of the Secret of Enoch has been widely published. The Bible grants him only a few lines in chapter 5 of Genesis. Another book, the Latter Day Bible, a Later Day Bible, was created in the 19th century by a young man who claimed an experience similar to Enoch's, except that he did not go off to another world. The Book of Mormon, the Mormon Bible, is purportedly a history of North America in the biblical times. There lies another remarkable story. And it definitely is a more remarkable story and full of BS. He's a con artist like everyone else in this religious thing, so they twist the truth. But we'll go along with this for now. On Tuesday, September 23rd, 1823, a young man named Joseph Smith awoke in his bedroom in Palmyra, New York, to find a strange, luminous being standing over his bed. This being, he said, was dressed in a white robe and had a brilliant, glowing face. He called the youth by the name and told him where he would find some gold plates buried nearby, which no one's ever seen. Okay. Except those who claim to have seen it way back then. No one's seen it since. When the proper time arrived, the entity is supposed to have told him he was to dig the plates up. Then the figure floated upward and vanished. So this gives you this, knowing how deceptive religion is. All religions, doesn't matter what it is, for the most part, but definitely the Abrahamic religions. And what kind of entity did that? Sometimes later, the boy was crossing the field when, in his own words, quote, "My strength entirely failed me, and I fell helplessly to the ground. For a time, was quite unconscious of anything," end quote. And when he came to, he said the same messenger was standing over him and gave him further instructions about the gold tablets. He was to dig them up 4 years later. Sure. I'm not saying he didn't see something, but the rest of it is just... So on Saturday, September 20, 1827, Joseph Smith went to the appointed spot and started digging. Sure enough, he actually found a stone box containing several plates of gold bearing strange, neatly engraved writing. Later, 11 of his friends and neighbors examined the plates and signed affidavits swearing that they had seen them and that they contain writing, quote, which has the appearance of ancient work, a curious workmanship, end quote. Smith was not a well-educated man. He worked for years deciphering and translating the writing of these tablets. I doubt that. And when he finished, he had an intriguing historical document, pseudo-historical document, which was apparently a history of North America in very ancient times. And by the way, the damn Book of Mormons quotes straight from verses out of the frickin' King James Bible. So we know that just that alone pretty much incriminates the whole thing. They claim that the Book of Mormon is supposedly supposed to be ancient Hebrew, right? Right? Something ancient Hebrew. So, and then of course there's some Egyptian stuff involved in all this crap too as well, and yet they're quoting word for word verbatim from the frickin' King James Bible. An impossibility, because first of all, what supposedly the New Testament was written in Greek, not ancient Hebrew, and he's quoting straight out from the New Testament. It's just bullshit. If you want to make a lot of money, there's a sucker every minute. And I've been the sucker myself at times. We're easily fooled. We're all easily fooled. Man, are we easily fooled. I'm kind of a little disappointed in this part of the book. So far it's been very interesting, but this part is like, but you know, we come from Western civilization and Christianity and all its many different sects. Some people say it's up to 46,000 sects in different churches. Really? So I hear everything from up to that. So because no one agrees and everything. When you read that book, you realize, man, whoo-wee. How do you justify even believing in it? But you can make a hell of a lot of money off people because we're desperate for companionship, for to belong. Don't we? We all need to belong, don't we? And we're willing to compromise our sanity and the truth in order to belong to a group. Because it's frightening living alone for many people. It is a difficult chore, that's for sure. I've been going through it for a long time now. If it wasn't for part of my son, I wouldn't have any interaction with anybody outside of going shopping for food and such things. And the few people that I talk to on the internet. But even then, you know, even then. Let's get back to this. Okay, and this bothers me too because I grew up a Mormon, so I know how. I actually left the Mormon church, and I had 2 months left of my mission when I realized it was no different than being in a business setting. You know what I mean? I might as well have been working for a Fortune 500 company. Jesus, it was so disappointing. He worked for years deciphering, translating, and writing these tablets, and when he finished, he had an intriguing pseudo-historical document, which was apparently a history of North America, quote quotes, in very ancient times, predating Indians, etc. And remember, this is the same time the American Indian Wars are going on, and this is, I believe that the Book of Mormon is brilliant propaganda for numerous reasons. And one was to rewrite the true history of North America, and B, that was the first one, so that'd be A, and then B would be the fact that they needed to motivate groups of people to move to places like Salt Lake City and other areas. And people were motivated to do it who were Catholic and other religions, so they needed a new cult leaders, right? They need. Remember, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church, they believe that they're the only true Church of God, just like everyone else, by the way, but they are really fanatical about that. This document became the Book of Mormon, and Joseph Smith founded the Mormon Church, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The tablets later disappeared or were somehow destroyed. I'm sure it's like... why would any of that happen if it was real? I mean, especially when you have the protection of these ultra-dimensional beings, right? I mean, certainly they would protect these places. You know, I mean, fuck. They're the ones that made him dig it up and translate and everything, go all the way to do all that stuff. They wouldn't protect that stuff? Certainly would know the fact that that would be very important evidence, right? Of course not. Because it's clear to me that religion is part of the reincarnation soul trap matrix that we live in. And I'm not that smart, but I can figure that one out. The tablets later disappeared and were somehow destroyed, and Joseph Smith was brutally murdered in a hostile mob in Illinois in 1846. Today, the Mormon Church has more than 2.5 million followers. Of course, this was written 50 years ago. It's probably double or tripled that by now, and I was part of that cult. And it's 100% a cult. And I'm glad I'm out of it. And it was a very difficult process, because when I left the church, when I 2 months left my mission and I was living in England, you know what? There was no support. There was no real support beforehand, but there was expectation for me to proselytize or to sell, to be a salesman for 2 years, walking around in my suit and tie, telling people or giving people the discussions and telling people that that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the only true church, and that Joseph Smith was a true prophet of God, and the only true prophet is the prophet to today. And it's just sickening when I think about it. I mean, we all are so much subjected to this freaking matrix of deception. And by the way, this is an important part of the deception that we're all living in. So I think it's very important to talk about this stuff and to figure out what is in the skies and what is paying attention to us and what is observing us. Was Joseph Smith's strange nocturnal visitor a UFO type of entity? Was some strange psychic force at work there, trying to pass along information about those golden tablets? No, I'm not sure it messed with his head. Some people claim they're demons. Some people call them angels. I think this is there's more going on than meets the eye. I think there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. Consider the prophet Daniel, like Ezekiel. Daniel reported seeing wheels of burning fire, Daniel 7:9. I wish they wouldn't turn to this Bible stuff, because it's not. I guarantee, the average person who sees it is much more of a reliable source than anything that comes out of the Bible. He describes in some detail his encounters with the entities who came down from the throne in the sky and whose hair was like pure wool. And so it describes Jesus in Revelation and in his second coming and with the judgment of Israel back in 70 AD. And still they're using that book today as a weapon against us. This being was dressed in a white robe with a golden belt, and like Jesus, and had a luminous face with two bright eyes, glowing eyes, right? Bright glowing eyes. He spoke to Daniel in a thundering voice that terrified the earthman. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for, of course, he'd be the only one to see it. For the men that were with me saw not the vision, but a great quaking fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves. Daniel 10:5-9. Yet I heard the voice of his words, and when I heard the voice of his words, then I was in a deep sleep on my face, and my face towards the ground. Like Joseph Smith, even like Joseph Smith, and even like Dana Molly, Daniel apparently passed into some kind of hypnotic trance. Later, he was given specific prophecies about contemporary problems. They came true. I don't know about that one. if they came true or not. And his book, A Guest from the Universe, Alexander Kazantzov, I guess I pronounce it, Kazantzov, theorized that the angels mentioned in the Bible might actually have been extraterrestrials. British ufologist Brinsley L. Portrench, author of The Sky People, supports this notion, as does Paul Misricki on Les Extraterrestres. They all cite the Bible, the biblical stories in Genesis, in which Lot meets two angels and takes them into his home, where they feast like ordinary men. Genesis 19:3. The Bible never describes angels as being winged creatures, although artists usually depict them that way. Indeed, the angels seem to have been man-like, though gifted with extraordinary powers. When they appeared before Abraham in Genesis 18:2, they were described as three men who ate and drank with him. Again and again, three men played important roles in biblical events. Three men repeatedly turn up in modern UFO events too, and provide still more puzzling aspects of the problem. Now, isn't this interesting that these apparitions, these developments, seem to coincide with the Bible and people that are ensconced with these religious texts as well, almost like being cursed or being guided by these the mind control and indoctrination that we experience in these religions. And very interesting. Ms. Ricky notes that the church did not accept the spiritual nature of angels until the 16th century AD. Before that, theologists considered angels to be physical beings. A few years ago, Reverend H. Whippich of Colbert, Canada, stated that, quote, the Bible description of angels fits intelligent beings from other planets. Sure enough. More aptly, the description fits intelligent beings from this planet, beings that look like us but possess the peculiar special qualities of ultra-terrestrials who share our world yet are a species apart from us. We must also note that these, quote, angels are, according to the Bible, frequently concerned with the propagation of the human race. Abraham's elderly wife, well past childbearing age, is said to have given birth to Isaac after a visit from the three men, Genesis chapter 21. So we are told that these men possess the power of life and death. They are credited with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. They restored Abraham's Sarah's to fertility. The book of Revelation, the last section of the New Testament, is especially important to the study. At first reading, it may seem to be filled with vague poetry and may defy interpretation, but if you take many of the passages literally and avoid the symbolic and religious interpretations, the new meanings will open up to you. For example, in chapter 4, we are told that a door was opened in heaven, and there is a description of an interior of a place occupied by creatures similar to those reported by Ezekiel, told with the throne apparently surrounded by glass. Before the throne there was a sea of glass like unto crystal. 4:5. 24 beings in white robes are set around the throne. They had their heads crowns of gold. They had on their heads crowns of gold. Revelation 4:4. We must remember that the men who wrote the Bible had no knowledge of machinery or technology, and so they were forced to describe things in terms that were familiar to them. Those, quote, crown of gold, and a quote, could have been helmets of some kind, could have been. But here's the thing, when it comes to the book of Revelation, it's just written after the fact. It's Roman propaganda, and it's the description of the destruction of Jerusalem around 70 AD. That's what it is. Once you put that in its proper context, audience relevancy, who's actually being spoken to, what is it actually about, it's just prophetic warnings, because all these prophecies happen after the fact, and they're not written down, right? They're always written down after the fact, so you have no idea if it's true or not. You don't know. But if you look at it logically, the preterists, the full preterists are right about that. I'm no longer believing any of it, but they are right when it comes to the book of Revelation. Yet they keep using this over and over again to mind screw us all. So they were forced to describe things in terms that were familiar to them. Those crowns could be helmets. Okay. In chapter 10, then John declares, I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as the pillars of fire, and his sounds as he were describing a brilliantly glowing sphere surrounded by vapors, clouds, and colored lights. A rainbow, two beams of light and flames were jetting down, and beneath it, pillars of light. Man, I disagree with any of that, but whatever. The way it's written, you can take it in a million different ways, unfortunately. That's why you can't trust it. As well-known astrophysicist Morris K. Jessup sought links between UFOs and religion in his book UFO and the Bible. Were the flaming crosses and other objects seen in ancient skies really religious omens, he wondered, or were they actually machines or apparitions? We could say apparitions, some piercing the veil, right? Something that has to do with, as we talked earlier about electromagnetism. Who the fuck knows? Okay, and the actual machines from some alien civilization, Dr. Carl Jung, they celebrated psychiatrist and astronomer Dr. Jacques Vallée, also wonder if the historical reports of these objects might not have been distorted by interpretations created by the climate of the times. Thus, in the biblical days, when men were seeking some indication that there was a higher power, they almost automatically considered objects in the sky to be of religious import. During the wartime, such objects were regarded with suspicion as possible weapons of the enemy. And in this present era, when spaceflight is the national goal of two major nations, there is a strong tendency to accept unidentified flying objects as extraterrestrial visitants. Many of the Egyptian and biblical accounts are supported by their history written during the same period. Early Greek and Roman historians dutifully recorded many strange things seen in the sky. A light so bright it seemed to be full day descended over the temple of Jerusalem during the Feast of Unleavened Bread in AD 70. There we go. Joseph describes a demonic phantom of incredible size, which appeared in that same year in May 21 before sunset on that day. There appeared in the air over the whole country Jerusalem chariots and armed troops. Did I say Joseph? Is supposed to be Josephus? That sounds like Josephus. It sounds more like Josephus if it's. Yeah, it's Josephus. I said Joseph. Josephus. That sounds like his writings, which some people say was injected into the, who knows, by Christians later. Who knows? Josephus described the demonic phantom incredible size, which appeared in the same year in May 21, before sunset on that day. There appeared in the air over the whole country Jerusalem chariots and armed troops coursing through the clouds. Levy reported phantom ships in the sky in 214 BC. Pliny, the most notable of ancient historians, recorded several instances in which 3 suns were seen in the sky at one time. A flaming cross appeared over the heads of Constantine and his army in AD 312, and the army of Alexander the Great was thrown into panic when 2 shiny silver shields spitting fire around the rims buzzed their encampment. Scholars and researchers have now uncovered hundreds of ancient UFO accounts. Pick out any century and you will be able to find several good reports of discs, balls of fire, cigar-shaped objects in the sky. Historian W.R.D. has unearthed references of Magonia, a strange country that was a legend among the peasants of medieval France. They believed that the Magonians rode about in cloud ships and frequently raided their crops. Agobard, Archbishop of Lyons, wrote that one of these ships is supposed to have fallen from the sky around AD 840, and its occupants, 3 men and a woman, were stoned to death by the angry farmers. Italian ufologist Alberto Fengolio uncovered another intriguing touchdown story, which is supposed to have occurred near Alençon, France, and at 5 a.m. on June 12, 1790, a police inspector named Léabouf was sent to Paris to investigate, and his final report has been preserved. The witnesses, a group of French peasants, told him that an enormous globe had appeared that morning, moving with a rocking motion, that it crashed into the top of a hill, uprooting the vegetation. Heat from the object started grass fires, and the peasants rushed to put them out before they spread. The huge globe was warm to the touch. The eyewitnesses of this event were 2 mayors, a physician, and 3 other local authorities who confirmed my report. Léabouf wrote, not to mention the dozens of peasants who were present. As the crowd gathered around the mysterious object, a sort of door opened, and there came out a person just like us, but dressed in a strange manner, in clothes adhering completely to the body. Seeing the crowd of people, this person murmured something incomprehensible and ran into the wood. Woods. Wood, but the peasants backed away from the object fearfully, and a few moments later it exploded silently, and nothing was left but a fine powder. The search for the mysterious man was launched, but he seemed to have dissolved in thin air. Here in 1790, we have a description comparable to modern UFOnauts reports. a man wearing a tight-fitting overall type of garment. According to this story filed by Lusitania News Service in April 1960, hundreds of villagers in Beira, Mozambique, East Africa, or is it Bria? It's our Beira, something too. Saw a whistling orange object land in a field, and a tiny little man leaped out of it and ran into the forest just as the thing exploded violently. Those little men could not be found either. Did we say men plural there? Did he say singular before? Oh yeah, so it is tiny little men. So the Zurich Central Library has an old drawing of a strange event that took place over Germany in April 14, 1561. Large numbers of plates and blood-colored crosses and two great tubes staged an aerial dogfight on that date, and thronging and frightening the whole population of Nuremberg. 5 years later, a similar group of objects is said to have appeared over Basel, Switzerland. Some of them turned red and faded away, just as modern UFOs have been reported to do. A sketch of this incident is also in Zurich, Wickenea collection. The late Charles Fort, and it's eccentric but indefatigable. What the hell is that word? I think I just learned a new word. Don't care what people think. Fatigue. Indefatigable. I don't know what that word is. I should know it. A person or their efforts persisting tirelessly.
Indefatigable.
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 Indefatigable. I never heard that word in my life. It's good when you learn something new. Indefatigable. Once again, is a person or effort persisting tirelessly. Defender of human rights. So, and he was, that's for sure about Charles Fort. That's why I call myself Fortean, the Fortean digital shaman. And behest of Charles Fort. And that's a word that Charles Fort would use. But indefatigable, Reacher spent much of his life wading through yellowing newspapers and forgotten history books to ferret out Ripley-esque items. That was definitely Fortean, that one as well. Without realizing it, he became the first ufologist, and his book of the damned and other works are treasure troves of unexplained aerial phenomena. He discovered that 1846, for example, was a most peculiar year. It rained blood, a real blood according to the newspaper accounts of that day, in several areas around the world. All kinds of odd lights and shapes were seen in the sky. Some very peculiar people also turned up in Europe at the time, prancing around the English countryside in silver uniforms, capes, and helmets with red lights on their chests. These beings were human in size, but seemed to possess the ability to leap great distances, so the British newspaper referred to them as Spring-heeled Jacks. So Spring-Heeled Jacks. Old Jack got plumb away from all those who turned out to search for him after each one of his puzzling appearances. On Tuesday, October 3rd, in 1843, a remarkable cloud passed over Warwick, England, and one Charles Copper. I'm really like getting myself a... Cooper ties. Cooper. Charles Cooper reported seeing 3 white, human-shaped figures in the sky. Another person 6 miles away is supposed to have seen also these flying beings. The sightings was added to the constantly growing angel lore. And a very important contact to ultra-terrestrials took place in France. When a luminous being descended in a glowing sphere and passed along some prophecies which later proved to be very accurate. This case will be discussed in another chapter. The whole 19th century was a busy one for unidentified flying objects. It was also the century in which man made his first faltering attempt to fly. A French engineer, Henry Giffard, built the first controllable dirigible in 1852, powered by a steam engine. It was 44 feet long. Of course it would be. You got that number straight from the Bible, I like. And whizzed through the sky at brisk, taking 7 miles per hour. Paul Heinlein, a German, built a gas-powered dirigible in 1872, and a Hungarian named David Schwartz constructed the first metal dirigible and took off from Berlin on November 13th in 1897. He managed to fly several miles before the gas leak brought him down. While these pioneers were struggling to go a few miles in their slow, clumsy, cigar-shaped machines, thousands of people around the world were reporting the presence of larger, faster dirigible-shaped objects. Astronomers such as Trojan of the observatory in Meudon first claimed notice of these things in early 1870s. They were high in the atmosphere, he said. It did not resemble anything within his experience. Trojan described his August 29, 1871 sighting in La Année Scientifique. I guess it would be probably 17. If I'm pronouncing that right, Scientifique. And observed that one of the formations, the object appeared to descend like a disc falling in water. This was the first description of the falling leaf motion, which appears to have some modern reporters, and even which appears in so many modern reports, and has even been recorded on film. Newspapers' accounts of these aerial objects were frequent and widespread during the last 3 decades of the 19th century, but the dam really broke when in 1896-97, when giant cigars were reportedly viewed by thousands of people as they flew over many of the major cities on Earth. Leading newspapers of the day carried extensive descriptions and drawings of them. Their mysterious journey created the first important UFO flap and inspired H.G. Wells to write his classic novel, The War of the Worlds. And that's the end of chapter 4, and I hope we don't talk much more about that Bible stuff. Just my personal take of things. For good reasons, too. I think it's black magic, so...